For our next speaker, we didn't know if the schedule and today's agenda would align, hence why we have two keynote speakers in the morning. So I'm thrilled that we were able to make it happen. The Business Support Working Group that I mentioned earlier, they specifically asked for Pierre to come back and speak at the summit, and this is one of their key requests. So Pierre, if you can provide us a little update on the economic outlook. I'm keeping my fingers crossed here. Please join me on the stage. And I know you like to walk, so welcome Pierre Cléroux from BDC.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for the introduction. Somebody stole the clicker. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
I can leave it for you.
No, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. The minister said it this morning, the economy is slowing down, and he's right. And he also said that the next year or so is going to be quite uncertain, and he's also right. So what I'm going to do in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to try to explain what's going on. So what happened in the last 2 years to create this inflation, and what does it mean for the next 12 months? So first, I'm going to start with the economic outlook. Second, I'm going to focus on Ontario. And finally, a last part that I want to talk about is the labor shortages, because some people made the comment this morning, and it's actually probably the most important issue we have in Canada, probably for the next 5 years. So I want to explain why we have this issue and why, unfortunately, it's not going to go away and what we should do about it. So first, let's start with the Canadian economy. The economy is slowing down. The graph that you see is the GDP, or the economic level activities per quarter. The potential growth for Canada is 2%. If we look at the graph, over the last few quarters, our growth has been much higher than 2%. Just the last quarter, the third quarter, we are starting to see a slowdown. So we're not in recession, actually, in Canada, in Ontario. I'm going to show you Ontario a bit later. The growth is still positive, and it reflects in the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate in Canada is 5.2%. This is lower than before the pandemic, and this is actually one of the lowest unemployment rates in the last 50 years. So that's one of the reasons why there's a shortage of labor. It's because there's more jobs than actually people in Canada. We have been performing very well. But there's also another factor, aging population. I'm going to keep that for the end. But what happened? Why is the economy has been performing so well over the last 2 years? Well, there's three reasons. First, consumption has been really increasing. Government programs have helped Canadians to go through the pandemic. The job market is good. There's more jobs today than before, and salaries have been increasing. So people have been spending money, which is stimulating the economy. There was another factor. Commodity prices has been increasing very significantly. The world economy recovered, so there was a stronger demand, and also the war in Ukraine. Ukraine is producing a lot of commodities, so because of the war, the price of wheat, the price of oil, natural gas is increasing. And that actually benefiting Canada, because when these prices are going up, we produce, as you know, a lot of commodities in Canada. I was in Timmins yesterday. I could see the positive impact of increased commodities on lumber, but also on minerals. There's a lot of mining projects because of the new technology that we're using, but also because of the war in Ukraine. Finally, businesses has been investing. Business investment, as you can see from the graph, have been increasing every quarter since the middle of 2020. So consumers have been spending more. Businesses have been investing more. The war in Ukraine have created higher commodity prices. All this put together meant that the Canadian economy has been performing very well. The downside is this has provoked an increase in price. The inflation rate went up to 8.1% in June. It's going down a little bit. It's at 6.9 now. But as you can see from the graph, this kind of inflation is quite new for Canada. It's much higher than what we used to see in Canada, around 2%. So that was a perfect storm. The Canadian economy has been performing well, so the demand is strong. Also, the war in Ukraine has increased prices, and supply chain issues around the world has also put pressure on price. So this is where we are now. The economy has been performing well for 2 years, but inflation is high. And like the minister said, inflation is actually bad. Inflation is negative for people, especially for low-income people. When the price of food is increasing, everybody is affected, but especially people with low income. Also, it's bad for businesses because it's increasing costs. Not every business is able to pass these costs to consumers, depending on your business model, your sector, the size of your business. And it creates a lot of uncertainty. So inflation, everybody agrees that something should be done about it, and that's exactly what the Bank of Canada is doing now. The Bank of Canada is increasing interest rate to slow down the economy, to put inflation down. So far, they have been increasing interest rate 6 times in the last 7 months. The prime rate now is at 3.75. Unfortunately, this is not going to be enough because inflation is not going down quickly. It's actually last month, the last figure we have, it's 6.9, just like in September. So the Bank of Canada will have to increase interest rate more. So this is the first thing. For the next 12 months, you should expect that interest rate will keep increasing. Until which level? Well, that's not clear. That's not sure. It depends how inflation is going to go down. Our forecast is 4.5%, but the Bank of Canada might need to go higher than that, depending if inflation is going down. So what happened when you increase interest rate? Well, some sectors of the economy is slowing down. The first one is the real estate sector. The volume of sales in Canada has really declined. It's now below 2019. So that's a direct result of increasing interest rate. Prices have been going down as well by 18% in Canada. But if you look at the graph, you can see that prices are still much higher today than before the pandemic. So this sector is not crashing, it's just actually going back to normal. In the last 2 years, prices in Canada has increased by 40%. That was not normal. Now we're going back to a kind of a normal situation. You can look at the graph at the end, you can see that prices are a bit more stable. So they went down and they are pretty much stable now. Another sector that is slowing down is retail. As Canadians are paying more for their mortgages, their mortgage payment, well, they have to cut somewhere, and retail is one of the sectors that is affected. Because every month, there's half of Canadians who have a variable rate on their mortgages. So each time you increase interest rate, well, these people are affected. They don't have the same amount of money in their pocket. So we don't believe that retail is going to collapse. The reason is there's still money in the system. This is the savings that Canadians have in their bank account. So if you look at the beginning of the graph, in 2019, Canadians had $26 billion in their bank account. It went up to $200 billion during the pandemic. Government program helped people, but also remember, there was a lot of restriction on the economy. We couldn't travel, couldn't go to restaurants. So that was a great time to save, and that's what Canadians did. But over the last 2 years, as inflation is increasing, as interest rate is increasing, the amount of savings has been going down. People have been spending money. But we still have about $94 billion in savings. So this is a great shock absorber for the impact of interest rate and also inflation. So yes, retail is slowing down, but it's not going to collapse because of that. In terms of businesses, business investment intention are also slowing down as the economy is slowing down and the demand for their products and services is slowing down as well. It's still positive. Businesses are still investing, but they are not going to increase investment as much as they did over the last 2 years. So if I try to summarize all this, so far, the economy has been performing very well. Everything was green, except the real estate market, who already started to slow down. For the next 12 months, we're starting to see some red flags. Consumption of goods is slowing down. Business investment is not going to be the same. The real estate market is going to stay soft. So what does it mean? Are we going into a recession? Well, not necessarily. We don't believe we're going into a recession. Yes, the economy is going to slow down. Our forecast is actually the growth is going to be close to zero for 2023, as the economy is adjusting to this interest rate increase. But if you look at the graph, you can see that even zero growth is quite a different scenario than the last 2 years. In 2021, the Canadian economy grew by 4.6%. This year, the year is not over, but growth is going to be well over 3%. So in 2023, with a flat economy, with zero growth, businesses are going to feel it. The demand for products and services is not going to be the same. It's not to increase the same way that it did over the last 2 years. So we're not expecting a recession, but a major slowdown in the economy with growth that will be close to zero. Having said that, the risk of a recession is definitely increasing. There's two risks that we are following. The first one is the Bank of Canada could increase interest rate too much, and that could create a recession. As you can understand, it's a tough strategy. You're increasing interest rate to slow down the economy without creating a recession, to slow down inflation. So this is not a perfect science, as you can imagine. So the Bank of Canada can go too far. Second risk that we're following is coming from the US. The US economy is in the same scenario than we are. The economy has been performing very well. The unemployment rate is low, 3.7%. But interest rates are increasing very rapidly in the US. That could lead to a recession, and by rebound, we'll be affected here. So some economists have this mild recession scenario. And I put the two scenarios on the same graph to show you that the difference between slow growth or mild recession is actually very small. Nobody's talking about a major recession like in 2020, where we lost 3 million jobs in Canada, or in the financial crisis like in 2008. So yes, the economy is slowing down. It will be close to zero in the next 12 months. We might have a quarter that is positive, a quarter that is negative, but overall, the economy is going to be close to zero growth. I want to, one final point on this graph. The situation we are in is quite different than the two last recessions. The two last recessions came from outside Canada. 2008, financial crisis in the US that created a world recession, including in Canada. 2020, well, you all remember what happened. We had a virus coming from outside, and that forced our governments to put the economy on pause to protect our healthcare system. This time around, we control the slowdown. The Bank of Canada wants to slow down the economy to reduce inflation, but they control interest rate. If the economy is slowing down too much, they can reverse their strategy. They can slow down the increase of interest rate. They can even put interest rate down. So we have much more control on the situation now than we did in 2008 and 2020. So there's more reason to be optimistic. So Ontario now, well, the Ontario economy has been performing very well over the last 2 years. Growth this year is going to be about 3.5%. If we look by quarter, you can see that the Ontario economy is still growing. Last quarter, the last data we have is still positive. It's slowing down, but it's still positive. When we look at the level of job, we can see that we're starting to see that the number of jobs is slightly going down. Basically, these two sectors where the number of jobs is going down, retail and also construction, which is related to real estate. Beside that, the rest of the economy is still growing. But it's a sign that the economy is slowing down. So first, if we look at the real estate markets, it's the same situation for Canada. The volume of sales has really been declining as interest rate is increasing. Prices has been going down as well. Again, prices are much more elevated now than before the pandemic, but there was a correction in the last few months as interest rates are increasing. And one of the reasons why we see a correction is because the level of mortgage payment is a bit higher in Ontario than in the average in Canada. This is actually in yellow, the average payment for people in Ontario in terms of mortgages compared to in dark blue for Canada. The housing prices are higher in Ontario, so people pay more mortgages. But when you increase interest rates, you have a bigger impact. So we believe that the impact on retail is going to be a little bit stronger. Also, if you look at this graph, you can really see the impact of interest rate. If you look at the last 2 quarters, both for Canada and Ontario, you can see that the average mortgage payment has been increasing in the second quarter, and we don't even have the third quarter. So you see the impact of increasing interest rate on people. People have to pay more. You withdraw money from the economy. People won't have the same amount of money to spend, and that's the reason why retail sales has been declining by 7% in Ontario. And this is probably just the beginning. We should expect that retail will continue to go down as interest rates are increasing. But there's a number of factors that are going to continue to support the growth of the Ontario economy as real estate and retail is slowing down. The first one is the unemployment rate is still very low. There's still a very high level of jobs in the province. Second one is the amount of savings is still quite significant. So people still have a buffer to face this interest rate increase and also inflation. So we are about $5 billion of savings, much higher than before the pandemic. Of course, savings has been going down over the last 2 years. Another good news is our export has been increasing. So our level of export is much higher today than before the pandemic, which is supporting the manufacturing sector in the province. So we can see manufacturing sales has been increasing over the last 2 years and is still quite high. Finally, business investment are more elevated now than before the pandemic. So there's a number of factors that is going to support the growth as some sectors are more affected by interest rate increase. So our forecast for the province is close to Canada. It's about 0.6% growth. Basically, growth is going to be close to zero in the province for 2023. But again, we're not expecting a recession. Just like in Canada, we believe that the economy is able to absorb this interest rate increase. So the final point I want to make is about labor shortages. I know it's a big issue for you. It's a big issue across the country. And the main reason for that is we have an aging population. 19% of people in Ontario are over 65. In Canada, the number is exactly the same. This is a huge increase compared to only 20 years ago, where we had only 12% of our people who were over 65. So what happened when you get close to 65? Well, you retire, and that's exactly what's happening now. Thousands of baby boomers are leaving the job market to retire. In the last 12 months, 400,000 Canadians retired. So this is a record. We never saw that in Canada. This number 20 years ago was below 100,000. So this is the reason why we have so much trouble to hire people, because the baby boomers, there was a lot of them, they are leaving the job market to retire. Unfortunately, this is not the end of it. And if you are in business, the number you want to remember is this one. 21% of Ontario workers are over 55 today. So that means that in the next 10 years, these people are going to retire. I was sitting in Timmins beside a client in the forestry industry, and he told me when I showed this slide that in the forestry industry is about 70% who are over 55. So some industries are going to be really affected by this aging population. And when we look at the next generation, people who are below 25, you can see the proportion is much lower than older. 20 years ago, look at the beginning of the graph. 20 years ago, the proportion of younger workers was higher than older workers. Now it's the opposite. So this is the issue, the challenge we have as a country. The numbers for every province is similar. It varies between 20 and 22%. So in every part of the country, we have exactly the same challenge. So immigration is a key. There's no doubt about that. But as businesses, we don't have a control on immigration. What we have control on is what we can do as a business. We did a research at BDC. We look at more than 2,000 companies across the country. We look at how they are facing this issue and also at their success. Best strategy by far is investing in technology and automation. I know the session after me is exactly on technology. This is really the key. Technology doesn't replace people, but it does replace tasks. And in many sectors, in every sector of the economy, you can replace some tasks inside your business by technology. You can use a software to send your invoice. In the manufacturing sector, automation has a great potential. So this is the future for us, because for the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have a shortage of labor, and the cost of labor will be increasing. If you're in business, you know that over the last 2 years, salaries have been increasing. This is not the end of it, because even if the economy is slowing down, it's going to be difficult to recruit people. So you have to think about how you're going to grow your business in the next 5 years in this new context, in this new normal. So in conclusion, the economy is slowing down. There's no doubt about that. This is actually what the Bank of Canada wants to see. They want to see the economy to slow down to reduce inflation. So this is exactly what's happening now. So you should expect in the next 12 months, interest rates will keep increase. We'll see the economy to slow down. We are not expecting a recession. We believe that the economy can absorb this interest rate increase. But for the next 12 months, the economy is going to be bumpy, a lot of uncertainty, and the growth is not going to be the same as the one you have seen over the last 2 years. But we should be okay. We should avoid a recession. I'm going to stop here, and we'll take some questions, and we'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Oh, which one I got? There we go. Thank you, Pierre. Okay, so I've got a couple of mics that can go out to the audience. And okay, I'll go over here because that's the way of least resistance to start, and I'll go the other way.
So you didn't talk about the war in Ukraine. I just wondered how you feel that's going to affect things going forward.
The war in Ukraine is having a great impact on Europe, and actually most European countries will be in recession this year. They have the same situation in here if interest rates are increasing, but really what hurt them is the energy crisis. The war in Ukraine is creating an energy shortage. I'll give you an example that I find extraordinary. Last week, I was talking to my equivalent, the chief economist of the BPE France bank, which is a similar bank than we are. And he said it was freezing because the new legislation in France is they force people to limit the heat at 19 degrees. So he's working in a building at 19 degrees because of the shortage of energy. So this is a very concrete, very real example of what's happening. So unfortunately, European countries are going to be in recession because of that. In Canada, we are far away. So not only we're not affected by that, and we don't have any energy problem because we produce a lot of energy, on top of it, we benefit from the war because the war is creating an increase in commodity prices. So when the price of wheat is increasing, we benefit from it. When the price of oil is increasing, we benefit from it. So actually, Canada has been benefiting from this war. It's very unfortunate to say that, but that's the context. We produce about the same commodities than Ukraine and Russia. So this is, from an unfortunate situation, we are benefiting because we produce a lot of commodities.
I think it's on. There it is. If the major banks are collecting more money from Canadians in the form of interest payments on their mortgages, where does that money go in the economy? Do you understand what I mean? Yeah.
I do understand. But actually, you know, the banks are making profit on the margin. So, you know, they also pay more on the international market to get some money. So, you know, the banks are borrowing money on the international market, and they lend it to Canadians. So they make money on the difference. When interest rates are increasing, they are paying more. So that's where the money is going. They are paying more for their loans, and they are charging more. Right now, the situation is not actually benefiting the banks because the level of lending is actually slowing down. As interest rate is increasing, consumers have started to request less mortgages and also less loans. So this is not a good situation for the banks. They prefer when the interest rate is lower and people are demanding more mortgages. But they're still, don't get me wrong, they're still okay. But, but it's not that's not the best situation for them.
Good morning, Pierre. My name is Ahmad Kadra. I am representing the Professional Engineering of Ontario in this room. And my question related to the labor shortages. We have known the boomer babies for the past 1 million years, and all of a sudden now it is affecting our life. Why the Canadian government start to deal with that problem now, importing 1.5 million new immigrants after the fact? What's going on here?
Well, there's a number of reasons. And one of the reasons is, I agree with you, we didn't take our aging population serious enough. So immigration has always been strong in Canada, but we should have accelerated before. I agree with that. But at the same time, what happened really is the pandemic. During the pandemic, the level of immigration dropped by half because of the restriction. So we kind of missed 2 years of immigration. At the same time, the economy has been booming. So the combination of the two, the reality is there's 1 million vacant jobs in Canada right now. The minister said almost 400,000 for Ontario. Canada is 1 million. So this is the result of the pandemic as much as the result of our aging population.
Thank you very much for that extremely informative briefing. John Beddoes, I'm the mayor of Gananoque. To what degree is housing affordability a negative factor in labor mobility in Ontario? We have a firm in Gananoque called Cardinal Health, US multinational. They manufacture medical devices. They worked all the way through COVID because when you need a pacemaker, you need a pacemaker. Right now, they're hiring, they're offering $18 an hour with full benefits, medical and dental, pension, all of it. But there's nowhere to live in Gananoque if your gross salary is $36,000 a year, or $36K a year, which is what you earn at 40 hours a week, 50 weeks per year. So how much of a negative factor on labor supply where it's needed is housing affordability? Thank you.
I don't have the answer, but definitely it's a factor right now. We are seeing that not only we have a shortage of labor, but we have a shortage of houses in Canada, in Ontario, everywhere. We haven't built enough. The good news is despite the fact that real estate is slowing down, the housing starts in Ontario is still increasing. I understand that builders are focusing on rental because the interest rates are increasing, so people are not buying as much. But rental is popular. So we need more of everything in housing. There's a number of reasons why we have a shortage of supply of housing. The immigration has been strong. There's a lot of regulations in many municipalities that make it difficult to build. We have to look at this. We also have to make sure that we create the proper environment for builders, because a lot of builders are slowing down their housing start because they find that the cost of everything is too high for them. So they are not able to afford to build houses. So this is a very complex issue. Unfortunately, I don't have the magic answer, but that's something we really have to look at because it's really creating a problem everywhere. It's everywhere we have a shortage of houses in Canada. So this is really a problem for the country.
The shortage is focused at the bottom end of the market, particularly for purchase to own. And part of the problem is the focus on build has been in the middle and top end of the market. So there hasn't been balance in the housing stock and new construction starts for the last 5 years. It's all been middle or upper end.
Yeah.
So restoring that balance is going to take a lot of time.
But it's not easy, as you can imagine. Salaries are increasing. The cost of materials has been very high over the last 2 years. So you can understand that builders are focusing on the high end. So that's why I say the solution is very complicated. Governments will have to look at this to see how they can help to build more housing, because the cost has been increasing so much that they are focusing, like you said, on the high end. I agree.
Hi. So my question is specific to North America, but involves all of the economy, and you just talked about housing prices going up, and energy is such a big part of that. I think the whole world knows that, you know, there's global warming, there's climate change, and that we have to go to a greener way to live over time. But why the flick of a switch, and especially with the war in Ukraine, and why the flick of a switch to go so green so fast and shut down the reserves that we have in North America to a great extent? And we only have to look back 3 years ago to the price of fuel to see that. Why? What are we, who maybe don't understand the answer to this complex question, missing on the logic of governments not to still use oil and gas to our advantage, keeping in mind that we're shifting to green, but not overnight, maybe over 10 or 15 or 20 years? Why this insanity in my mind? Because oil goes into so many products. You mentioned them. You've been mentioning them all morning.
Yeah. I agree with you. The challenge we have is in many people's mind, we switch to green energy, but the problem is we don't have enough green energy. 80% of the world energy has a carbon footprint, like oil and gas. So when we say we want to switch from that, I agree, and I think everybody agree, but we need the green energy to replace it. So what's happening right now is investment in oil has been really declining because of this switch that we are doing. But at the same time, we don't have the green energy to replace it. So that's the reason why the price of oil is so high. I'll give you two numbers. In 1914, we invested in Canada $70 billion in oil. This year, we'll be investing less than 10. Because over that period of time, nobody wants to invest in oil anymore. And this is not only in Canada, it's around the world. So the demand for oil around the world is increasing faster than the supply. So like I said, the goal is good. We want to move away from oil, but we still don't have the other energy that is going to replace oil. So in the meantime, if you don't increase your supply and the demand is increasing, what happened with the price? Well, the price is going up. And that's exactly what is happening now. So you should expect that the oil price, the price at the pump, is going to stay high because the supply is not increasing anymore. So we need really to develop those alternative energy. And like you said, I totally agree with you. We switch too fast. You know, in order to move to another green energy, you have to have it. So I agree we have to develop it. But right now, our underinvestment in oil is hurting us, basically.
Next, we've got Darren, and then actually there was someone, yep, do you want to put your hand up right at the far end? Yes, over there. And then we're coming back to Mitch and then Mike, okay? So Darren first.
Pierre, I'm just curious, obviously housing's been discussed and I'm happy to hear that, but I think there's another sector that hasn't really been discussed today, and that's food and the impact of inflation on food prices. Now, I know everybody spends more at the grocery store these days. Can you talk about how much you see as the pursuit of corporate profit and how much that's impacting inflation and pricing on food?
The main reason why food has been increasing so much is because of the pandemic. There was disruption in the supply chain around the world, also the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine made the price of wheat, for example, really increasing and very unstable. The price of wheat went down, but because like 3 weeks ago, Mr. Putin said he's going to stop wheat shipment from Ukraine, well, the price went up. This morning, Russia announced that they are going to reopen the shipment for the next 4 months. So this instability is increasing prices because you have wheat everywhere. So that's the first reason. In terms of the corporate profit, I think there's some element to it, but I don't think it's what is really the crucial factor. The crucial factor is the fact that the supply around the world has been disrupted first before the pandemic and because of the war. And that should go back to normal at one point. The war is not over, but the impact of the war might be better. But that's, I would say, the most important factor. Are some businesses benefiting from that? Maybe. But there's a lot of competition in the food industry. So the most determined factor is really what's happening on the supply side.
But don't you find that with the recording of record profits by all of the major grocery retailers, don't you find that a little bit odd in timing then?
I think they have some of them, and I want to, because I haven't looked at their profit very closely, but obviously some of them have benefited from that. They took advantage of the fluctuation. But again, they were able to do it just because the price of everything went up because of the war and because of the problem of supply during the pandemic.
Pierre, thank you for the presentation. It was riveting, I'm sure, for everybody in the room. But you're also an investment bank, and I'm curious, when you present that and discuss that behind the closed doors of BDC from an investment perspective, what do you see in the near term in terms of priority investments for the Crown Corporation? What do you see 5 years from now, perhaps? And what relevance can you see that for us here in Leeds, Grenville, who ourselves want to attract investment here? Thank you.
Very good question, a complex one. The short term, we're preparing for the slowdown. We're preparing to help businesses during the slowdown. That's our mandate at BDC. During the good time and the bad time, we want to support small and mid-sized businesses across the country. We did in 2008. We did in 2014 when the oil price went down and the west part of the country needed help. And we did it in 2020. In 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, we doubled our number of loans because a lot of businesses needed this. And I will share this anecdote that I find very interesting. We had so many requests that our account manager couldn't do it. So at the bank, they asked everybody that was free, meaning who could spare some time, help them to do loans. So on my team, I had economists who were doing loans. So what they did, because you cannot do loans like tomorrow morning, so they split the work. So I remember this guy, who was an economist for me, he had to call people who were requesting a loan to see exactly what they needed. That's the first time in his life that he had direct contact with clients. So that's what we did in 2020. We put everybody in the machine ready for that. So that's exactly what we do now. In the short term, we're preparing for a slowdown. We're not expecting a big recession, but we want to be ready. So that's basically what we are doing now. In the 5-year horizon, we're doing two things. We want to focus more on smaller businesses because we believe there's still a market gap in terms of financing. We also want to focus on the green energy. We want to help Canadian businesses to make this transition from using the carbon footprint to more green energy. For example, we want to help entrepreneurs who have a building to reduce their need for the carbon energy to more electricity. So we want the next 5 years for us, this is where the focus is going to be. We're going to continue to do what we do, but we're going to do much more to help businesses to reduce their carbon footprint.
Good morning, Mr. Cléroux. I'm Tara from the United Counties of Stormont-Dundas, Glengarry. I was fascinating presentation, and I think one of the questions that I have is just, In your 0.6% employment, or sorry, your economic projection, do you feel that there's going to be haves and have-nots in that list? Will rural Ontario be more adversely affected than metropolitan areas?
Probably not. Sectors that are more affected by its retail, especially on the goods side, not so much on service side, construction. The manufacturing sector is not affected yet, but it could be affected if there's a slowdown in the US economy because we export a lot. Sectors that are less affected are mining. The demand for mining will continue to be very strong, which is, to your point, rural area. Agriculture is going to remain strong. Strong demand for agriculture in Canada, coming from inside but outside the country. And food transformation. It's a sector that is growing in Canada. We never talk about food processing, but it's actually the second largest manufacturing sector in the country, and it's a sector that is very stable because there's a strong demand for it. So this sector is not going to be affected. So I wouldn't say that rural economy is going to be less affected. I think it will be less affected than big center. Like right now, the economy has been performing very well. But downtown Toronto is still suffering because a lot of people are still working from home. So a lot of small business in the service sector that used to see 1 million people coming to the downtown area, well, now it's a fraction of that. So the recovery has not been as strong or as good for downtown Toronto than the rest of the economy. So for the slowdown, I'm more confident for the rural area than for the big cities.
Over here.
Good morning, Pierre. Bill Passy. Thanks so much. It was a very interesting review you did this morning. I've got two questions embedded in this comment. So when I look at the central banks, and you didn't spend a lot of time talking central banks, they really got inflation wrong. They called inflation transitory, and we're managing inflation the old-fashioned way, looking in the rearview mirror to see what happened 2 quarters ago, and there'll be revisions, and so likely will dip below zero. So two questions. One, why do you think the central banks were so wrong? And what lessons have they learned to lead going forward so we don't see a significant economic downturn a year from now? Hopefully when you're here again talking to us, we're in a different situation.
Yeah. Two good questions. The first one is the biggest reason is the war in Ukraine. Nobody expected that we will have a war, and the impact is great because Ukraine and Russia produce a lot of commodities. So the price of wheat increased by almost 100% at the beginning of the war. The price of oil increased. So when you increase these base commodities, you have an impact on inflation. So that's one of the reasons. Second reason is the recovery has been very strong and very fast, stronger than economists expected. So I think the central banks were surprised by that. And the third reason, I remember in January, they were thinking, because we talked to the Bank of Canada very often, they were going to increase interest rates in January, but Omicron came. And a lot of provinces, Ontario and Quebec, especially Quebec, they make restriction on the economy. That slowed down the economy. So they didn't increase interest rate in January because central Canada was under restriction in January. So they waited until March. In retrospect, because it was hard for them to increase interest rate while you have restriction on the economy. So I'm not the one to excuse them, but there's good reasons why they waited so long. And really what changes the game is the war. Nobody were expecting the war, and the war had a really big impact on costs, on prices. I can tell you they try everything to not make the same mistake. The mistake now is not to increase interest rate too much. And we met the governor of the bank 2 weeks ago, and they do everything they can, but it's very hard for them. The game is to increase interest rate to reduce inflation without creating a recession. So that's a tough game to follow, especially that inflation is not going down as quickly as they would like to. There was a joke inside my team. Last month, the Canadian economy created 100,000 jobs. And people said, well, this is a very bad news. It should be a good news. But in the context you want to reduce inflation, this is not a good news. Salaries in October, year over year, increased by 5.6%. This is way too much. If you want to reduce inflation, you cannot have salaries increasing by more than 5%. So that's the challenge they have. So it means they will have to increase interest rate more to put inflation down. So they do, I trust them. I have fully, I believe they are smart people, but they don't control everything. They don't control the outside world of Canada. So are they going to make the same mistake going too far? I don't think so. But, it's not a perfect science. So that's the reason why it's difficult. And what is different now is the job market is very tight because of the aging population. So normally when you increase interest rate, the economy is slowing down, you should see more job loss. But there's so many vacant jobs that salaries are still increasing. So that's not helping their strategy.
Hello, Mike Dwyer, Township of Rideau Lakes, the Chief Administrative Officer. Our community is facing a major investment decision and a big facility for us anyways. And a lot of, I think, we've been conditioned to cheap money. We borrowed money 2 years ago at 1.2%, and now folks see it at 4.5 or 5, and they really get scared. But to me, when I look at it over a 20 or 30-year horizon, that's either below or at the average. So I think we've become conditioned to cheap money, and that's going to make people shy from making major investments, which is a concern. So that I can quote you for my counsel, what's your outlook in terms of the 2 to 5 year interest rate? Do mortgage rates and the impact on people and the U.S. sovereign debt actually put a cap on interest rates around 5%? Are we going to see them grow even further?
Yeah, very good question. I feel for you. Actually, you're perfectly right when you're saying that long-term investment always pays off, and it's always true. If you look in the history, it's true for a house. It's even more true for infrastructure. There's all kind of example that what sounds very expensive now, 25 years from now, is going to be a great investment. Interest rates are increasing. They will increase probably to the prime rate, to 4.5 to 5%. When inflation is down, interest rate will go down. And it will go down to what we call a neutral rate, an interest rate that doesn't have a positive or negative impact on the economy. So remember, at the beginning of the pandemic, interest rate went almost to zero. That was to stimulate the economy. Now, they are increasing at 5 or 4.5 to slow down. In Canada, the neutral rate is 2.5. So in the next 2 years, interest rate should go back to 2.5. And that will be our interest rate for a while until there's either too much inflation or a recession. So, but you should in long-term investment, you should think about that interest rate will be close to 2.5 in the long-term horizon.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for a wonderful speak. I was saying to Dermot, I said, I love hearing you speak. You're so concise and informative. So thank you for that today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wealth of knowledge. I was saying to Dermot, I heard you speak a couple of years ago. I still use your snippets of information. We're in finance and investment. And I guess just to dovetail on the interest rate, one thing that in our day-to-day speak with clients, people are worried, like as soon as you see the interest rates go up 6 times, 4% in the last 4 or 5 months, they think of 40 years ago when they were at 18%. When's this going to stop? And you try to have a conversation, because one thing you haven't really touched on is government debt. So the bonds, we've never seen the bond yields go down 18%. Yeah. So that is really what you're just talking about, that neutral rate of what's stopping that runaway interest rate. So maybe just comment on the US debt, the Canadian debt, and just probably, this is, Anne said, the last question, but I think just to maybe wrap up, because that is really the bigger concern, I think, for all of us as taxpayers going forward. If we see these rates at 4%, 5%, 6%, we're the ones paying the tax bill on that. So if you don't mind commenting, thank you.
So I will make two comments. The first one on the Canadian debt, and also after that on the long-term interest rate. So government debt in Canada before the pandemic was 40%. The ratio of our debt on GDP was 40%. We went up to 60% in 2 years. That's a huge jump. The good news is that 40% we were the lowest in the G7 country. So the most important countries around the world. For example, the US is at 100%. At 60%, we're now still the lowest, but with Germany. Germany is also 60%. We still are in a very good position. We are 60, US at 100, Japan 250. So France is 110, Germany is 60. So we are still, like UK, much higher than us. We're still in a very good position. We still have a AAA bonding rating. So this is the best you can get. So we're still in a very good shape. Obviously, we cannot do that all the time. So we will have to be, I really like what the minister said. The Ontario strategy is to slow down investment, not spending, to rebalance the budget. In the context of inflation, that's exactly what government should do. So this is a great strategy. Second point is where, the interest rate will never, well, not never, but it will not go back very high for a long period of time because there's a lot of savings in the world and there's a lot of savings in Canada. In the developed economies, just like Canada, we have an aging population. A lot of people are getting older and they have a lot of assets, a lot of savings. That would keep interest rate lower, like I said, the neutral rate 2.5% for a long period of time. So we're not expecting to go back to interest rate around 10 or 12%, what we have seen in the past, because there's so much wealth, so much money, so much availability of financing in the world.
Pierre, wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Big round of applause for Pierre.
And thank you for the great questions. I think that's what makes these sessions very interesting. You had a lot of great questions, so thank you so much.
Thank you. And Keely must have read my speaking notes. You make it so concise and data easy to understand. And that's why we wanted you to come back. This is the first time we've ever had a speaker come here 3 times. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we hope you come back perhaps the 4th.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.